Oh, hello there, and welcome to Phil Talking D20. So, today's video, Secrets and Magic. I was very lucky to be gifted a early copy of the PDF so that I could obviously have a good trawl through it before the official release date. So a big shout out and a big thank you for Paizo for doing that for me. I really appreciate that. Um, and I wanted to start off my first video on Secrets of Magic by touching on the two new classes because we got to play test them. We got to kind of influence how they developed, and I think there's been some really quite big changes made to Magus, which are really important because I remember back during the playtest, I really liked the Summoner, but I kind of felt that the Magus was a bit hamstrung by some mechanical decisions they'd made and some feat choices that they put in play. And I'm really pleased to report that Magus has really come on strong and is now a much more rewarding and like playable class, whereas before, like I said, it felt a tad hamstrung. So the basics of Magus haven't changed. It's the spell sword, it's combat and magic combined. Your 8+ Constitution modifier hit points are the same. Key ability, strength or dex are the same. The saves are the same. Those kind of mechanical basics, if you like, of a class, what it's trained in, in terms of like the saves, etc. They haven't changed. They're the same. They weren't the problem though. So, jumping into the juicy stuff for Magus, it all starts with some very simple changes. They've fundamentally rejigged the synthesis ability, and that has now become hybrid study. And whereas the original ones in the playtest were a little weak, a little lackluster, they weren't particularly kind of attention grabbing when it came to what is fundamentally a core part of your class, they've really rounded them out in some really super cool ways. One of the ones that I immediately appreciated was Shooting Star, which was the kind of the ranged Magus, if you like, has changed its name and significantly improved its abilities and become Starlight Span. Ooh. Now, what does Starlight Span do differently to the original Shooting Star? The massive change up here is that your ability to imbue ranged weaponry is now the spell's limitation is the range increment of your weapon. Now, in the original, in Shooting Star, it was 30 feet or 15 feet for touch spells, i.e. close proximity spells, which made no sense if you were casting it on an arrow and firing it. So now you can cast a touch spell onto an arrow and fire it 100 feet from a longbow. Sweet. So that one really is a standout now. It means that ranged Magus is now very viable, very cool, and very unique. Starlight Span does lots of other cool things. I don't want to bog down too much. I want to kind of just touch on the juicy stuff, and kind of move it forward because I don't want to read you everything from the class because then why would you bother buying the book? But secondly, this book is so crammed full of awesome surprises that I did not expect or anticipate until I got to kind of reading through it. There's some stuff that I don't want to give away because I think it's going to be really cool for you to kind of thumb the pages and be like, oh my god, you could do what? But like I said, important bugbears, I think, also a monster, to kind of just make sure people know where we're all coming from. So that's a really cool one. Now, another nice feature kicks in at level 7 and is called Studious Spells. Now, what this does is it grants you a number of additional classic combat spells that are about enhancing or improving your ability to be a combatant, things like haste or enlarge, as bonus spells on top of your spell picks. The reason they've done this, very simple. You're a very capable fighter and a very competent caster. And to balance that mechanic, you don't get as many spells as a sorcerer or a wizard. The problem with that, however, is that it meant that the few spells that you had to pick limited what you could do, and you become a bit of a one-trick pony. So this studious spells that kicks in at level 7 is a brilliant way of freeing up some creativity and flexibility with your casting options. Fab, brilliant move. It was again one of those little things that I picked up on as a niggle that I was just like, I'm not sure it's going to be that entertaining to be this kind of caster, because you're going to get very narrowed in on, well, I have to take these spells to improve myself as a combatant, or I have to take these spells to make myself a buffer. But they were obviously only a couple of spells, and that was your lot. With a normal caster, it's not such a big deal. You can spread your bread around. So that's a really nice touch for Magus as well. However, the really, really juicy one is eschew materials, i.e. the ability to like replace a material component with a semantic component, is now baked into the class. It was a level 1 feat pick option, and almost kind of one of those classic scenarios of that's almost a mandatory feat. They've just baked it in. And you can use your weapon for your semantic actions. Brilliant. That solves so many problems and frees up so much action economy for the class, and also just makes their magical lives a lot easier. So those are really nice, simple kind of touchstones that kind of really change up the whole mechanical composition of the class, so that it's much more fluid to play and much more rewarding to play. Now, to kind of dabble it and tempt you with some titillation and delight, I'm going to have a quick gander at some of the abilities baked into this, because there are some new ones. Now, they've really kind of amped up what Magus is about. And we're going to start with Arcane Cascade, which just sounds badass. You basically get this from the get-go. After you wield magic, you can enter a special stance to make your attacks more effective. Interested already? One action. The classic one action. You used your most recent action to cast a spell or make a Spellstrike. Easy peasy. You divert a portion of the spell's magical power and keep it cycling through your body and weapon, using specialized forms of breathing or footwork, like Magic Sword Carter. There you go. While you're in a stance, your melee strikes deal 1 extra damage. This damage increases to 2 if you have weapon specialization, and 3 if you have greater weapon specialization. Any strike that benefits from this damage gains the Arcane trait, meaning it counts as magical for things like bypassing, damage reduction, etc. So, it goes on. If your most recent spell before entering the stance was one that can deal damage, the damage from the stance is the same type the spell could deal. So if you cast Fireball, it's fire damage for that bonus damage. Again, another cheeky bonus. And then, obviously, the one that I think most people are going to be curious about is whether Spellstrike is less clunky and more kind of dynamic. Now, the jury could still be out on that, because I'm not going to lie, if you're going to play a Magus, it is not a straightforward, I don't have to read anything, I don't have to pay any attention, I don't have to try. Magus is an advanced class, as it should be honest with you, because you're someone that has dedicated their life to mastering both martial and magical kind of combat. So it's not the kind of thing that the character is like laissez-faire about. if you're going to play a good Magus, you've got to be switched on, you've got to be paying attention, and you've got to kind of get to grips with it as a class. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because there's that just insufferable joke about the human fighter, which is like a staple of D&D-esque gaming jokes. What do you play? A human fighter. It's like ching, the least imaginative, least effort, least technically complex, simplest thing you could ever play. And to be honest with you, I don't have a problem with the classic human fighter, because some great role play, some brilliant characters, and to be fair, especially in Pathfinder 2, fighter, don't sleep on fighter. It's brilliant. It can be as simple or as complex as you like. But you're going to have to get to grips with Magus. So don't go, oh, I've never played before, that sounds fun, and then be slightly surprised if it's slightly challenging. Frequency, until recharged. Yeah. It's a 2-action action. I love that. Who doesn't love a 2-action action? You channel a spell into a punch or sword thrust to deliver a combined attack. Now, we already know we can change that up with one of the hybrid studies to make it also affect range attacks. Happy days. You cast a spell that takes 1 or 2 actions to cast and requires not 3 to cast a spell and requires a spell attack roll. Again, there are things that can change that up, but let's not complicate things. The effects of the spell don't occur immediately, but are imbued into your attack instead. Make a melee strike with a weapon or unarmed attack. Your spell is coupled with your attack, using your attack roll result to determine the effects of both the strike and the spell. Instantly an improvement over the, I have to roll for both separately, why am I doing this? Which is brilliant, so that's a nice step change. And it's good as well, because it's quicker and it's simpler at the table, which is what matters. This counts as 2 attacks for your multi-attack penalty, but you don't apply the penalty until after you've completed the Spellstrike action. The infusion of spell energy grants your strike the Arcane trait, making it magical. That's obviously always beneficial. After you use Spellstrike, you can't do so again until you recharge your Spellstrike as a single action, which has the Concentrate trait. You also recharge your Spellstrike when you cast a Conflux spell, which also sounds badass. See page 40. Always like that they put those kind of references in. Keep doing it. It makes our lives a million times simpler. That takes at least 1 action to cast. Casting a focus spell or another type doesn't recharge your Spellstrike. So it's pretty straightforward now, in fairness. And then they go into what they call Spellstrike specifics, because when you're applying all the options of spells that you've got, you imagine you're a 9th level caster, you've got that huge volume and array of spells, they all have different mechanical abilities, different acts that they can kind of damage types, all the myriad complicated things you can do with spells. They have basically a kind of a synopsis on how you manage what the kind of those kind of processes might be, because initially it's going to be fairly straightforward, but the further you progress into the casting side of the class, the more complex your spell strikes can become. And that's one of those things that you have to kind of be prepared for, both from a GM's perspective and a player's perspective. But if every class was mind-numbingly simple, boring, and mundanely simple to play, it wouldn't be as interesting a game. So, happy with Spellstrike. They have a little bit of guidance on what they call combining your abilities, because the Magus is very much combining magic and combat day in, day out, every day. Arcane Cascade we've touched on, which is a new feature that they brought in that wasn't in the playtest version. Brilliant, love it, always nice. Hybrid studies. So this was what they call the syntheses, which was annoying to say, so they got rid of it. It wasn't actually because it was annoying to say. It was because They weren't that exciting or particularly brilliant, but you can see what they were hiding. Does that make sense? I think the playtest is a very clever opportunity to kind of push people off piste, if you like, with what they're actually going to do, and making sure that they were kind of getting more feedback. If they did it as it was, they're going to get a lot of people kind of challenging it and kind of moaning about it. If you provoke that response, you're more likely to get what people do want because they're going to proffer you alternatives. So the fact that the Magus was slightly weaker in the playtest, I think, was deliberate, and I think it was probably a very switched on way of poking us as a community to go, no, this is what we want for it, this is what we'd like for it. So they're now things like Inexorable Iron, much cooler name already than some of the ones from the playtest. Sparkling Taj, which is very much defensive focused and enables you to imbue a shield like magically into your spellbook, so that your spellbook can be like as hard and resilient as like a steel shield, so that you can block with it, so that you can. And again, there's a really cool Magus ability where you like draw a book, a spell book, and you gain the benefits to AC as if it was a shield, but you also gain +1 on like recall knowledge checks. So you can kind of buff yourself defensively, but also like your alacrity with skills for identifying monsters. And there's the Sparkling Taj really kind of builds on that ethos of kind of imbuing defensive magic and shield kind of abilities into the Magus. Very cool. Inexorable Iron, you transform the mass of a Great Axe, Greatsword, or polearm, it's a very posh polearm, into an unstoppable force to augment your own striking power or keep you standing on the battlefield. When you enter Arcane Cascade stance at the start of each of your turns, while you're in that stance, if you're wielding a melee weapon in 2 hands, you gain temporary hit points equal to half your level. And you gain the conflict spell, Thunderous Strike. There's Laughing Shadow, Starlit Span. Laughing Shadow is very cool. What's really nice about them is that they're all very defined, separate, different spaces of play. I felt in the original playtest that some of them either didn't quite hit the mark of what they were trying to do, such as the ranged combatant one, that really didn't offer you any ranged combat. And then I think the one that everyone is most excited about from the kind of the chats I've seen on the Paizo Discord is Twisting Tree, which is pretty damn sweet, to be fair. And it's all about staffs and staff mastery, and the way that you can do cool stuff with it, and the fact that it physically reshapes and changes shape and gets new properties and new abilities. Super cool. And interestingly ties into a little sneak peek hint at something else that we'll be covering in a later video. There are rules in this book for making custom staffs, so that you can choose to build and create a staff with the spells and things such as like that in it that you want, rather than it just being one of the generic magic item staffs. Sweet. So conflux spells, they are literally designed to enhance and go in unison with your chosen hybrid study, and again are very much empowering along those lines. They're focus spells as well, which is brilliant because they're the ones that you can regenerate with 10 minutes of rest and that kind of regenerate action. So Magus has really kind of clocked up a gear to the point now where from playtest I wasn't interested. The Pathfinder 1 Magus was cooler. Now this one is seriously cool and properly holding my attention. And I think it's not going to be long before someone wants to play it at my table. I just get that feeling. But we'll see. So that is, I suppose, without huge numbers of spoilers and reading you every single feat across 20 levels and every single spell and spell-like ability, that's the core improvements that really shape and change up Magus in a very positive way. Everything else was kind of, you know, solid in there, and there are changes to and lots of new feats, and some things from the playtest have gone. The more solid ones that they were happy with have remained, and new stuff has come in, like I've mentioned. But I suppose those important key mechanical changes to Magus that really sort out its action economy and really enhance its ability to effectively be a spell sword, a Magus, you know, master of blade, master of battle magic, is brilliant. And it's very much focused in on that ethos now. It's there. It works. It's going to come into your game and it's going to do cool stuff that no one else can really do. And yeah, you could argue that you could, like, fudge bodge fight a wizard. Do you know what I mean? You can always have those kind of conversations, but this is a specialist and they do it very, very well. So it's very cool and very worth a look. Now, moving on to Summoner. Summoner was already a very solid class, in my opinion. I think they really got a really good, solid angle on what they wanted to do with it. And when it hit the playtest, it doesn't feel like it's changed a huge amount, but that's not a bad thing because it was already really solid in its build and its options and how they'd kind of geared it up. There probably are lots of little subtle tweaks and changes in the feat lists and things like that going through from 1 to 20 that I probably missed, but when I was having a general what's at level 4, what's at level 6, what's at level 8, there were lots of ones that were similar. There were lots of ones that we use in similar wording, and they were already solid. So I was, you know, there wasn't a lot to worry about there. One of the things that I think is, again, back to this action economy mindset that we all have. Funny how we talk about it more. I don't think it's actually a thing at all because every game has an action economy. It's just we seem to be more conscious of it in Pathfinder 2. Now, when you use 3 actions to summon your Eidolon, using old parlance, that would be a full round action. It also gains an action on arrival. So instead of you and the Eidolon having a round wasted, it gets to act. Happy days, makes sense, very helpful, very beneficial. Just reduces the annoyance of summoning the Eidolon, which was important, and they've done that easy peasy. Moving on. You still get something that I really like because it's a tad birdie. At 3rd level, all of your spells become signature spells. Now, to clarify, you are never going to have the number of spells that a wizard or a sorcerer gets because you have an Eidolon, which is an unstoppable force of death. It's like a super animal companion is probably the best way to describe it. And animal companions are already brilliant in Pathfinder 2, much better than they were when I remember having animal companions in D&D 3.5, where they were kind of pointless and died a lot, and when you got into later levels, you gave up on because they just didn't last. The Eidolon has seen a secondary damage buff, so its secondary attacks have jumped from a D4 to a D6, and its primaries can be D8s, so that's not changed, but the D4 to D6 is a nice upshift and uptick in kind of oomph. It's weird, I don't have as much to say about Eidolon, and that's not because it's not very good, that's because it was already good. And all they've done is a little couple of tweaks, which are important, but they weren't as important as the changes they needed to and have made to Magus. So the reason I'm starting with these 2 classes is because we're all fickle beasts. And although this book is absolutely rammed full of brilliant content that will literally probably last you years, because there's so many different variant rules and options that I'm not going to touch on in this video, because the classes deserve their own space and time separate from that. Don't worry, they're coming. It's a really great book. The artwork in it is fantastic. The fact that they've bothered to put so much time and investment in like fluff and flavor and lore text. So if you're a lore kind of world kind of fluff, nerd, there's good stuff in here. It's very cool. But let's just have a quick look at a few of the juicy stuff that we see in Summoner, like I did with Magus. So Act Together is now a 1 to 3 action, and the general gist of this is that you're still sharing actions. So if you make 1 action, your Eidolon can make 2. If your Eidolon does a 2 action, you do 1. They've kept you within the framework of the 3 action economy. Not a bad thing, because it's very important that they don't run too far astray of that for sanity and balance purposes. The artwork for the Eidolons is super cool as well. I mean, the artwork for the Magus is cool. There's some really cool bits of art, but the Eidolons look wicked. Share senses is still a thing, so you can like telepathically be linked and see through its eyes and hear through its ears. They've clarified that you can now share item bonuses between you and your Eidolon. So if you're wearing protection runes on your armor, the Eidolon gets the benefits to its armor class. Striking hand wraps apply to its like melee attacks, which is really nice. So there's some cool little kind of, they've really dialed in on this idea of synergy to the point where that you share the hit point pool, so that you're the same being, kind of almost split. They've done a really good job of emphasizing and working simple mechanics into the game that reflect how you are forged together but apart from the same magical energy that links you. You can do all sorts of cool stuff as well. I mean, I had a trawl through comparatively both Magus and Summoner with both documents open, like panning from like 1 to 1 with them on the same screen. And the way that they've really refined Magus into being a much more combat capable, magic offense defense capable class. Again, they've done that with Summoner. So you can really like amp up this kind of super companion that you have, to the point where it can glide and it can fly at later levels, and it can become a mount, and it can burrow or swim. So you can do all sorts of like those kind of alterations to it, like terrain adaptations if you like. But then there's loads of other stuff, like you can grant it the ability to gain different types of elemental damage, or those kind of links. And they've done a really good job of defining the different sources that the Eidolons come from. So there's like angelic, draconic, demonic, occult ones that are, apparitions and ghosts. And they've done they've tidied up and zeroed in on those concepts well now. Whereas before they were like, this is the idea of it. Now they're like, here's a good structural kind of, understanding of what they're about and what they're like, and their fluff and their flavor, which is really important. Without that fluff and flavor, you don't have the inspiration to come up with the kind of the ideas that get you geared up at the table. Let's have a quick skim through and see if there was any that jump out at me that I can slingshot your way without reading all of them and spoiling the book, because hopefully you're waiting for your copy to come out, and it will arrive in the post, or however you're going to, or you're popping down to your local hobby store. If you have a local hobby store, do please support them. COVID has mullered everything. We should try, if we can, safely and with respect, to get back out into those kind of locations. A little plug there for the local hobby store guys, you know who you are. Shared vigilance, you become expert perception, the pair of you. Twin juggernauts, fortitude saves, increase to master. Let's have a quick look. So when I was talking about how they've structured the Eidolon types, they give an example now of 2 for each. So just the first one that comes up, which is the Angel Eidolon, they offer you 2 stat line suggestions, one being the Angelic Avenger, the other being the Angelic Emissary. And their stats, I suppose, reflect their general role, one being combat-y, one being perhaps more skills, influence kind of focused. And they do that for all of them, which is cool. And again, some of the artwork for these is super cool. Like there's I assume, because it's in the section for Demon, that this rune-covered grey kind of scarified goat man with a glowing green sword and glowing fiery hooves is probably a demon Eidolon. Visions of Sin. Once per 10 minutes, Visions of Sin. Your Eidolon summons images of its sin into the mind of a target creature within 30 feet, tormenting and confusing the target. The target must attempt a will save against your spell DC with the following effect. The effect lasts until the end of your next turn, but your Eidolon can use a single action, which has the Concentrate trait, to extend the effects until the end of your next turn. Essentially like sustaining a spell. Maximum duration doing that of 1 minute. If the target is evil, it takes a -2 circumstance penalty to save, regardless of whether it succeeds. The target becomes temporarily immune for 1 day. Now, on a failure, the target is slowed. On a critical failure, it's slowed and also confused. You can't extend the confusion. But yeah, that's just, you know, your Demon Eidolon looks at someone at 7th level and boom, they have problems of an emotional and mental variety. Demonic strikes, this is what they start with. Your Eidolon's attacks are corrupted by the abyss and imbued with pure evil and shifting chaos. I mean, he sounds like a great guy to have at a party. All your Eidolon's unarmed strikes deal an extra 1 evil damage. As usual, this extra damage harms only good creatures or those with a weakness to evil damage. Additionally, choose one of your Eidolon's unarmed attacks that deals physical damage. It gains the versatile trait for a different type of physical damage of your choice. Evil. Classic. And then there's dragons and there's fae. You know, the Eidolons have got a huge wealth of kind of options, and I think they'll probably add more because there's a very kind of poignant statement when they're talking about you choosing your Eidolon, where they say on page such and such of this book, or other sources that you have access to. Hint, hint, there's going to be some more. Maybe in monsters manuals, maybe in particular kind of books that have other themes, because obviously this one is all geared up around magic, but if they do something about the Fae, there's probably going to be more Eidolons in it, or if they do something about the planes, there's probably going to be more Eidolons in it. So they've got options, and they clearly are thinking along those lines, otherwise they wouldn't have made that statement in writing. Energy Heart, expanded sensors, extend, boost, glider form. Now glider form you can get at level 1, which is pretty sweet. Meld into Eidolon, so you can like fuse in to become a kind of, you know, human focus point Eidolon hybrid battle form, if you like. Very cool. There's a lot going on, and like I said, both these classes are very well defined. You're not going to sit down and play this and someone playing a different class is going to be like, oh, you're doing what I do. You're going to be separate enough to not step on toes and be defined in your own role. And again, both of them offer lots of replayability with their different schools, with the different eidolons, with the different hybrid kind of study focuses that the Magus gets. They're brilliant classes, really defined, and most importantly, shaped with Paizo's understanding of listening to the community, which, let's not forget that. As a community, we play tested these, we passed our feedback back to them. Some of it was probably typed in caps lock, maybe spelt badly. This sucks, you noobs, spelt with a Z after the instead of an S. But they've taken constructive criticism, they've looked at the vision that they had, they've listened to the ideas that we've given them, and then they've refined, restyled, rethemed, and brought back two really great classes. So I'm super stoked to have this book. Like I said, if I'm honest with you, the classes for me are like oh, that's nice. But there's so much other content that I'm going to start to cover in the next video. So really kind of gear up and strap in for the next few videos, because I don't want to spoil the book too much, but I do want to kind of drop some juicy tidbits in case you're really just not sure what's going to be in it and you're not sure that it's worth it for two classes. Believe me, it's worth it. There's some great stuff coming. So, on that bombshell, I'm going to sign off. Stay classy, stay safe. I will catch you on the next video, which will be coming out very shortly, because I'm filming my content back to back for this book, because it makes sense. Because I've been reading it for like 3 days solid, and I'm going slightly mad. Anyway, subscribe, like, follow me on social media, and I shall catch you on the flip side. Peace.